Set up. It's 7 o'clock. All right. Hey everybody, welcome back to the History Dungeon. I guess I'm calling it. This is where I do all my best research at home. And so today we are going to be reading some history. I don't have any idea what historians do behind the scenes. So I figured that I would give you a window into that world. And I'm not technically a professional historian. I just make history videos. I do have a bachelor's degree in history. I've done research projects before, an undergraduate thesis. And so that is largely the extent of my history work. But for 7 years, history videos, and I've been doing all research for these videos. So let's talk a little bit about what historians do. So history is basically a sort of literary analysis. That's what I consider it. History means analyzing documents that people have written down, or I should say, text that people have written down. Essentially, if there's no writing, there's not really any history. In fact, prehistory, the time period before word. So usually what we say is before a group of people started writing, what you might commonly consider history, meaning the story of a people. Before the written, we consider that prehistory or sometimes archaeology, because we don't really have anything to go off of because they didn't write anything down. So when we're trying to learn about a people and they haven't written anything down, that is archaeology. We're digging in dwellings of these people and trying to figure out any little thing we can learn about them, the items that we find. So archaeologists will look at the way a building was constructed, artifacts like children's toys. In fact, if you've watched my video on the Vikings, you would actually know that a big thing that archaeologists find in Viking graves and sites are combs, which flies in the face of our common notion of Vikings as unwashed brutes. Like to bathe. They complain about them that they bathed, saying that basically all the chicks wanted them because they bathed. And they like to comb their hair and groom themselves. Another big find was ear spoons, which is basically like an old-timey Q-tip made out of metal. So that's what archaeologists do. What historians do is, the golden word is primary sources. So we find documents that were written either by a person who experienced a certain event or by a person that lived in the general time of that event or period. This why? We want the freshest information we can get. So who better than a person who is at a battle or a general who is at a battle? We also then we look for documents written by people who heard of the battle, talk to people who are at the battle. But the general idea is we want it to be in the same time period because, as you all know, if you've ever grown up playing the game of telephone, the more that information gets passed from source to source, the more unreliable it is. So, what are primary sources, or how do we find them? Well, there is a type of job called an archivist. It's kind of like library. People find documents to libraries, and there that maintains these documents because, first of all, they're very perishable. Usually, these documents are written on paper, which we all know burns pretty well, gets wet, ink can blot, ink can run. Before paper, people used parchment, which is essentially stretched skin. You might imagine that with mold, bugs, with fire, these documents are very easily destroyed. Even before then, we're talking about clay tablets and Egyptian papyrus. And I've heard this, but I need to verify. Uh, in the days of clay tablets, cuneiform, which was the writing that used a sort of stick to mark clay in this sort of like triangle, streaky sort of writing. This was common in ancient Babylon, ancient Acadia, ancient Assyria. Since they wrote on these clay and fired them, essentially like you would a plate, like any piece of pottery, uh, these tablets, I've heard, tend to survive better than things like Egyptian papyrus because they're made of clay that's already been fired. So the fire doesn't really damage them as much as you might have. In papyrus scroll will just go into smoke. Okay, so the point is people find these documents and then they store them, and then essentially they just wait for someone like a historian to come along and read these documents and use it in their research. So there are probably thousands of documents that a historian has never touched. Then again, there are periods of history that are more interesting. So there are certain people's memoirs, like Napoleon, that historians have read over and over, similar to Shakespeare, analyzing the document. And why do I say that? Because history is less of a science, more of an art. Now, bear with me. The ancient Greeks considered ancient history, or I should say history, an art. Um, that's because the ancient Greeks' history was written as poetry and oftentimes recited in song. So when you were listening to history, experiencing a performance, you're getting a man singing the history, and also the history was in poetic verse. So, performance. However, I still consider history an art because when you do historical research, you're not doing the scientific method. You're reading a text and you're analyzing to see if you can find out some tidbit of information about what the text is talking about. And when I say it's like Shakespeare, because you can read Shakespeare and there's so many meanings and so much symbolism. History is very much the same way. When you read a document, you can't just read, you need to make observations about many things. How is it written? What language are they using, for example? And when I say, I don't mean like Spanish or English, I'm talking what register of the language are they using? Are they using very formal language? Are they, what are the certain quirks of how they're writing? And then also, a big question is, why are they writing? Back 400, 500 years ago, when we were writing on parchment was expensive. You basically had to kill a lamb to use its skin to make parchment. And so basically, paper or writing materials were in short supply. And not a lot of people could write. So the point is, you think about it and you're like, okay, someone thought that whatever this was so important that they had to, or in the instance of government documents, a king needing to keep track of his kingdom needed to hire people who could write to write down exactly what's where, whose property belongs to what, how many sheep do we have this year, and so forth. So think about the why. A lot of times, very pedestrian reasons. Government needs to keep track of things. But when you talk about letters, you ask yourself, okay, why are they writing to this person? It's a loved one, a wife. We're human. We understand that. We want to communicate. Sometimes we just want to keep in touch with our family. But you have other people who are writing letters for pleasure and sometimes talking about what they're doing in the day. A lot from what they've written. So I've given you sort of this whole introduction about why we read primary sources. Um, and I think now we can move into reading actually a primary source, and I promised you is about coconut wine. And we'll get into it, and I'll make a lot of observations about this primary source as I read it. But of course, I always need some water since I've been talking a lot. So what's great sometimes, what I love about historical articles, a lot of them are free to access. jsthor.org, an amazing repository of so much knowledge that we can get into for free. I use these articles for every single video I do, and it that I've used as a reference is cited in my sources. And I never say anything in my videos that I can't prove with the sources that I've used. And so what you're witnessing now is essentially what I do when I'm researching my videos. Basically, I find this article, and a historian has already analyzed the primary sources and given their take on it. So usually the articles start just like this, where the historian is writing their article, writing their report. What's really cool is some of these historians opt to include some of the primary sources in the original in the article. So, for example, this document in the appendix, I can't fly to Mexico and find this document deep in a library somewhere, and I wouldn't even know where to start. So what's really great is this historian gave us his primary source so we can examine it ourselves. I've read through this already. This is a document written in the early 1600s about, and mostly informing about the production of coconut wine in Mexico and information about what was going on. And I'm going to warn you, I'm not going to go through this whole article word by word. Problem is, this seems to me to be a government document, meaning it's not the most interesting. A lot of it is a lot of fluff. But even from the fluff, so this first sentence, and I speak Spanish, I'm not even going to try. What we see here, first of all, it's the introduction, and I can get a general understanding of what's going on. The problem is, first thing we see, and this is an issue in a lot of historical documents, is abbreviations. Many of us use abbreviations all the time. LMAO, LOL, JK. Think about, though, in 300 years. Is someone going to know what we meant by that abbreviation? It's possible they can figure it out, and you'll see that we can actually figure out some of these abbreviations. But it makes it very, very difficult to understand what's going on. Someone reading this may have understood exactly what this person was saying, but 400 years later, Spanish has changed a little bit. We don't use these abbreviations anymore. So some of it requires some detective work, which in fact is the fun part, at least for me. And if we need any our other sources, for example, I found this source. It's called the Handbook for Translators of Spanish Historical Documents. We've got a few pages of a list of commonly used abbreviations. So this can help us out. Unfortunately, this person that wrote this didn't cover some of the abbreviations that happen in our document, but we'll use our history. So, like I said, what we look at is the context. Oftentimes, these documents start with a bunch of fluff of introducing who they are or introducing what this whole document is going to be about. And what we can see here, this already tells me, of all, this person, and it is a man, so I'm going to say he, is addressing to this person. Now, what this stands for, certainly, is Vuestra Excelencia, which means Your Excellency. We go on and we see some of these other things that are not really important to our analysis, but we continue in the context. We notice that he mentions la villa de Colima, the village of Colima, por el tiempo de los 4 años, para que puedan hacer y vender el vino de cocos en la forma que aquí se refiere. And again, the village of Colima for the time of 4 years. So earlier in this article, the historian there had to be a prohibition against coconut wine. We might need to do a little bit more detective work, but this in fact could be some sort of announcement of the prohibition. Now, the text is, I mean, I don't think this guy even uses sentences ever. It's just like a block wall of text. So it is a little confusing. He mentions some of the things that are going on in Colima village at the time. Again, what you'll notice here, and this is our analysis here, starts with a guy's name, his title, Marquez. You're going to see this a lot in the document. In a society like Spain in the 1600s, class was everything, and titles were everything, name was everything. So oftentimes you'll see that this writer refers to someone by their whole name and their title. So in this case, Don Antonio Sebastián Márquez de Mancera. So his whole title. Let's go on, and I'll read and try to understand what's going on. Por cuanto ante mí se puso el memorial siguiente, Excelencísimo señor Juan de San Pedro, vecino de la villa de Colima, en número de su cabildo y ayuntamiento, que en dicha proa sus vecinos a su costa, como es notorio con sus armas, están defendiendo en las ocasiones que se han ofrecido sus puertos de sal agua en la mar. Let me translate and let me paraphrase. So, this person that he mentioned before, and this other person, Juan de San Pedro, who is a neighbor in Colima, is mentioning neighbors on the coast. So Colima seems to be a coastal town, to be sure, but they're saying that they're defending their saltwater ports. South del sur de los enemigos que ellos han pretendido desembarcar. So, defending their saltwater ports from the south, from their enemies that have tried. Y en el dicho puerto de los naos de Filipinas y conducir los gentiles hombres que en el dicho puerto salten en tierra. So, some of those abbreviations were a little strange for me. Essentially, the gist of this seems to be that in the specific port of Colima that's being defended by the Spanish authorities, they're giving notice or news that Filipino boats are ashore and trying to jump on the land, which seems to be a way to say they're trying to invade. And as we go on, so already something interesting. We have, so he says, de Filipinas, from the Philippines. Now, this could mean boats full of Filipinos. It probably does, but not in the way that we're thinking. Spain the Philippines and was conducted in Manila in the famous galleons. Galleons were huge vessels that were intended to carry a lot of cargo. And as Spain has been the first to discover the Pacific, cross the Pacific, and realize water across the Pacific to the Philippines and do big areas of luxury goods like China, they opted, and it probably was faster and more and safer, buy things in China from the other side through the Philippines ship it to Mexico, have it cross Mexico to the other side, the Caribbean, and then ship those goods to Spain. There's another issue here. The Portuguese and the Spanish had divided the world in two spheres, Yes, and discoveries. Once Portugal had found the way to India, happened just before Columbus, essentially the Pope to divide the world into Spanish and Portuguese halves, so that there wouldn't be any conflict about who gets what. In this era, like I said, it was probably before Columbus, uh, and if it was after, it was just shortly after. So the Portuguese say, "Oh man, we've got India, we've got all this trade." Little do they know there was an entire continent sitting between Europe and Asia that the Spanish would soon find and colonize and extract wealth from. So if you think about the world and you divide it in two, there's a line on one side and a line on the other side. So the line on the other side went about west of the Philippines. And so thinking like a Spaniard, yes, it's out. Let's go to America, let's cross Mexico, let's save goods from China. But you have to realize, if they did it the other way, the Portuguese would raise a stink, probably go to the Pope and complain that they're breaking the treaty, or they might just blow up your ship and blow up all the expensive stuff that you bought in China. So we can imagine this is probably why the Spanish did it. I can always do some research and be sure, but my guess is that's where the origin of the Manila galleons that would sail to the Philippines and back to Mexico occurred. Now, those boats had large amounts of Filipino workers on there. And my research, when the Filipinos came to Mexico, you might think, oh, they're waiting just to go home. They miss their family, they miss home. There's actually evidence to suggest that because of some unrest in the Philippines, probably due to the Spanish invasion and just the general governor by warlord, the Filipinos actually thought it. So a lot of them jumped ship. And this is important to our story. Now, so when we read here that they're saying Los Naos de Filipinas, boats from the Philippines, what we're talking about is the Manila galleons. And if there's some sort of invasion happening, that's probably some sort of rebellious Spaniards trying to take control, or outlaws, pirates, that sort of thing. So let's keep moving. Por cuya causa, for which cause? So we already mentioned he's informing of the invasions, people trying to come and invade by sea. He says, por cuya causa, for which cause, y habérseles perdido las huertas de cacao de que se sustentaban, which is how they sustain themselves. El año de 626, the year of 626, which probably means 1626, con un huracán que dicha proa, hallándose pobres, trataron de despoblarla. ¿Y por qué no lo hiciesen el excelentísimo señor Márquez de Serralúo? Este reino les concedió licenciada por 10 años para plantar palmares de cocos. All right, a long sentence. And here is something, and we've just learned something important. The previous analysis was mistaken. So I mentioned that there were some sort of invasions happening, some sort of unrest in the south of Colima. And having lost their plantations. So as we read ahead, we see this word, con un huracán, which means with a hurricane. So unfortunately, my dude here that's writing this is not very good. I mean, this whole document is basically one whole run-on sentence. But in fact, it looks like the were not really destroyed by the invaders, but rather in 1626 by a hurricane that que sobrevino, that came over. Okay, and then we hear this interesting phrase says, finding themselves poor, they tried to depopulate it, which when we say depopulate, it means force army depopulates. But I think in this case, what we're reading is that they found themselves poor, and so they tried to leave because they didn't have anything to eat. Okay, so another mistake I made, I said this was Marqués, which was a title, like a marquis. Reading this again, Señor Marqués, and it's just abbreviated. Um, okay, so what we learn about Señor Marqués is he governs this kingdom, and he ceded or granted a license for 10 years to plant coconut palms. And here we get this really crazy abbreviation. Our handbook and see if maybe because this looks like something important that we need to understand. So we're looking for PU. Okay, PUO is pueblo. Pleito. All right, let's look back at our document. Okay, PUA and MTE. So PUA looks like it's not in here. Maybe it's puerta, but I'm not sure. We might not even find what this means. Oh, here we go. Muerte. MTE, muerte. Tendría ser something muerte. This is not a Spanish word normally. This is an abbreviation. Dicho vino. So to sell and do something. Oh, you know what? This probably is not muerte, but mente, which indicates an adverb. So probably. So it's describing hacer. So this, I think we'll just move on, but we can generally guess from. So the governor of this area granted a license for 10 years to plant cocos and sell and make coconut wine. March 4th, 1627. Okay, so I read ahead a little bit, and after this, we're going to review what we've learned from this document. So he granted the license to make the wine in 1627, and he governing this New Spain, which is what Mexico is called. He forbid 8 years until February of 1636 to appear with the protomedicato de esta ciudad que declaró ser dicho vino medicinal y en nada nocivo y don diferentes pareceres y junta que para ello mandó formar. Period. All right, so this language is a little bit difficult. I'm just going to use Google Translate because I think I know what this word means, prorrogar, but I'm going to look it up. Aha. Looks like it looks to mean a sentence, and then we will, and I'm going to check if anybody's in the chat. Looks like we got one person watching. Hey there. Cap the document in a second. So throw in a question in the chat. I'm happy to chat, happy to answer. Okay, so following along this document, back where we were, he allowed for them to make the wine, and we get some dates from when. And he extended for 8 years the protomedicato. I don't quite understand what that means, but it's basically when you read, it may be sort of like a medical declaration, because what we read on, it says the protomedicato of the city that declared that this wine is medicinal and is not poisonous. All right, so let's recap. We have our guy writing. He's writing about coconut wine. He says in the village of Colima, we're getting these boats from the Philippines, and they're trying to disembark and basically invade. That's happening, and also a hurricane destroyed cacao plantations, and so the people that live there found themselves out of a livelihood and wanted to move away. So to solve this problem, the governor of this area gave them a license. Now this is kind of interesting, but just like now we have regulations on agriculture, so this is sort of like a early form of agricultural regulations. This guy had to grant them a license to grow cocoa palms and sell and make wine from the coconuts. And he also extended a declaration that it's medicinal and not poisonous. This is important because alcohol can be made from a lot of things. It can be very dangerous if it's not made properly. So not giving people trust that they can buy coconut wine, drink it, not die, then it's nothing's going to happen. They're going to make the wine and no one's going to drink it. All right, so that's where we're at now. I promise. There's a few places where I might skip over a little bit because there's like a lot more fluff in this than even I'm used to. Okay, so we have this person, Excelentísimo. This is a good way to know that they're talking about someone important because it's Your Excellency. The Señor Conde de Salvatierra, siendo virrey de este reino. So we have viceroy, a viceroy, essentially like a vice president, basically a governor. So a license for 10 years or until, and you list the date. So what we have here is we've got people making coconut wine, and they're doing so legally, sanctioned by the government. Okay. As we read through this, we have another prorogo, so an extension of the license for 10 years. Oh, blah, blah, blah. The dates don't really matter. It was back in the day to have people memorize dates and care about dates. The only reason we care about dates is to generally build a narrative and know what happened, but it really doesn't matter the exact date. Okay. Disaster that happened, un incendio. And again, we have the same sus habitadores la despoblaban. So because of this fire, the inhabitants were leaving basically and depopulating the region. And the government needs people to live there, mainly to make use of the land, but also end it if some foreign power comes in and wants to take over. Okay. Unfortunately, nobody in the chat. Okay. Vuestra Excelencia, again, another honorific title, was served or was to extend this license for 4 more years until 1674. 1626, we're already at about 50% of this license to produce coconut wine. By the way, after we get through this, because this is really kind of a slog, but it gives you a window into what we do when we're in the article, they're a little bit easier document or excerpts from primary sources. There are also so as a little dessert at the end, we can, and I promise you, I've read those. They're way more interesting, and there's way more analysis you can do. For this document, just to stop and kind of consider the analysis that we're doing, This guy is basically recounting events. It makes sense. It's probably a government document, but we can still pull out very interesting. For example, of course, the societal importance of titles. He's listing all the governors. Who knows? Maybe if you didn't list someone's title and that person read it, it might be considered an insult to get you exiled, challenge you to a super important in this culture and on Mexican history. But simply reading this document and doing my analysis, that is one conclusion I can take, because it seems like this guy is very intent on making sure that he's listing out who was the governor, making sure to say His Excellency, Your Excellency, Your Majesty, those things. So that's part of our analysis, just a very exact text. Besides that, we've gotten a little bit of events. We know a hurricane happened, and basically people wanted to leave Colima area. So the way that they kept them there was give them license or extend the already existing license to make coconut wine. Now let's use our thinking caps. He doesn't talk about anything else. He just says the coconut wine. There must be something about coconuts so that people would stay there. Now coconuts, so it might be just that. It's very coconut wine was prohibited. They down any coconuts that they saw, or arrest you if they found you with coconuts. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is that, so to rewind, saying that the government might cut down the coconuts, that means that people needed permission to grow coconuts and to make the wine. Clearly, that was enough to make them stay. Growing the coconuts, they are they're getting enough sustenance from those coconuts so they're not dying of hunger, or making the wine is so lucrative that they find a way to. Again, with this analysis, this is literally what we're doing. We're trying to pick apart every little thing that we can figure out from this short document. So he talks more about extending a license again to 1678, and Your Excellency succeeded from the great ruin of the earthquakes from in this hit with natural disaster after natural disaster. And he's addressing whoever he's speaking to. The problem is he's not very concise. So I'm trying to understand what. And to be honest, let's look up this verb, desamparar. Maybe that'll give us a clue. Desert. Okay, so, and then we get this, another abbreviation that doesn't make sense. Maybe we can look up the abbreviation, HAUDO. Yep, not here. Sometimes in Old Spanish, they'll write U when they wanted to write a V, and that has become a B nowadays. So this could be habido tantos trabajos en ella. So they're saying there's an earthquake and people, the neighbors, vecinos, the inhabitants, deserted this works that they had experimented. Of course, what's kind of annoying with the abbreviation, if this is in fact habido, it's just one extra letter, bro. I don't even know why you had to make an abbreviation. Movido de su mandato y del que hizo el alcalde mayor que les gobernaba, se detuvieron y han ido y van pasando con el fruto que sacan de dichas plantas con que se sustentan. Ok. Y resulta su magna cantidad al caos. paraphrase again. So going back to this, um, big earthquake. Uh, it seems that they deserted the work that they were doing there again, uh, and through some effort of the mayor, alcalde's mayor, mayor is the great mayor, so that's got to be some sort of title in the Spanish Empire, who is governing them. They went they went passing through the fruit, the coconuts, that they sustained themselves with. And since there were so many, a considerable amount, it looks like is a tithe, 10% to the church. Um, so it seems a weird passage because it's tithes and maybe they're paying them in coconuts. And then he's describing that they're being sent to different and something about souls in purgatory. He gathered up the and basically the church from prays for souls in purgatory. Uh, yeah, like I said, this is like one big run-on sentence. Okay, here we hit a part which is also very interesting. He's talking about taking away the prohibited beverages and prohibiting the sale and I guess commerce in that wine. And he's describing the wine here. He's saying it's taken out from the honey of the plant with a light fire. And he says they call this tuba. This is very important because that is a direct borrowing from the Filipino language for coconut wine. Uh, this one word might be the most important word of the document. Why? Because etymologically, same thing. We know that ships were. So we can assume right now. Of course, we probably want more evidence, but we can assume right now that there's a through line from Filipino industry in coconut wine to Mexican production. Filipinos either or taught native Mexicans to make coconut wine, and their interaction was so close that the native Mexicans decided to use the name for the coconut wine. And okay, so here he's talking about just like in Spain, you make burning water, basically liquor, medicinal. And I'm reading on a little bit to try to, sometimes when you don't understand the middle of a sentence, you can read on and try to get the entire gist. This is very confusing. Since we don't have that much, I won't do what I would do in a professional setting, but we need to make sure that we analyze each word. We know the exact translation, or at least infer as close of a translation as we can, so that we're not losing any information here. We also could mistakenly make a claim, and our evidence is actually faulty because we didn't translate it right. I would try to break this down a lot more than what's going on. But another decision that we have to make is it worthwhile to do that work? Hey, someone dropped in. We're going through a primary source right here. Feel free to send a chat. I'm going to answer it if you have any questions. To give you a recap, never mind, they left. Okay, so back to this. So what I was saying was, when we write an article, when we write a history, we want to argue something. all the research to prove, but we read a lot of articles, and some of them have nothing to do with what we need to inform our research. So, to be quite honest, what I would do in this situation here is I would just go forward and scan the rest of it, because it seems like he's going off on a tangent talking about church. Later here we see beneficios eclesiásticos, so church benefits, diezmos, again, tithes. I'm not interested in church history. I'm interested in the coconut wine. So what I'm going to do is just quickly scan ahead. So here he's talking about the wine. Que por tal corra en su gobernación conforme a las leyes licenciadas. So he's saying, when he's talking about the wine, he's just saying it conforms to the licenses that Your Excellency had conceded in the past. So that's not that very much interesting. Here again, he says this person's name, that, and he even made little dashes, probably to draw the of either whoever he's writing to, or someone that works for this governor, just to be like, yep, I gave him his props, don't worry. Let me just check if there's anyone back in the chat. Okay, there's 2 more people in the chat. Hey, chat, if you guys have any questions, I can recap what we're doing, and just put it in the chat, and I'll answer the question. As it is, looks like we have 1 person in here. You can accompany me along this journey. We're talking about, we're reading a document from the 1600s about licenses to grow coconut wine. What I learned is, all right, someone left. All right. So here we are scanning ahead. I see Juan de San Pedro is mentioned again. This must be some important guy. And here he's talking about Colima. The neighbors or inhabitants sell coconut wine for a time of 4 years. So again, he's talking more about just like the licenses. Here's something really interesting. Okay, so this time, MRD, let's actually look that up really quickly, because I think that means like merchandise or something. Merced, never mind, it means mercy. So that this time, this said time passes, the said mercy, and with the quality of her, probably of the wine, although it's weird that he said deya, not deyo, because the thing that he says here is so that you don't adulterate, or how would you translate, like vitiate, like adulterate or do wrong with another beverage. So that's interesting. Seems like at least oversight, if not outright regulation, about the quality of alcoholic beverages. Now we're getting to the end of it. I'm still scanning here. He mentioned Colima again. He mentions 4 years again, so that they can make and sell coconut wine in every part and place of New Spain, with the qualities that are understood in this dispatch. ¿Por dónde parecen no ser de los comprendidos? En la prohibición. Yeah. So it looks like here, like a pronouncement. So maybe this is sort of like an announcement that this license has been granted, although the previous paragraphs would suggest that no. Again, he mentions not adulterating, having vice in. He may that when he says otros brebajes, which I assume are beverages from the prohibited ones, this may be sort of like a legal clause, like you coconut wine, but do not make or drink other beverages. 4 años, México 14. Aha. Okay. So yeah, it's interesting because almost like an announcement, and here it's mentioned with the date and with the name of the person that pronounced it, and it looks like MDO. What could that be? I would have said mano, por mando. Okay, that makes sense. So by order of His Excellency Don Pedro Velasquez. All right, woof, that was a slog. But we read it. And to be honest, this is part of the work. Unfortunately, we didn't get much information that was super helpful for the type of research that we're doing, but we learned some very interesting things, mainly that Filipinos brought this technology to Mexico. Whether they taught it on the Mexicans there, not likely. Whether they jumped ship and went on board, onto the coast and started the coconut wine industry there. The most important word out of all these words is right here. Because that indicates that there's a through line from the Philippines to Mexico with the manufacture of coconut wine. That there was a lot of natural disasters here that made people want to move away, but we learned that not only did they grant the coconut wine to keep people there, so this might mean that the coconut wine trade was very lucrative, but they also made a declaration that it's medicinal and not poisonous. Helped the industry. So that was tough. If we decided that this was more important to our research, and you will find those documents where you're like, I know they're saying something here that's very important, but you would what you would do is make sure that you understand that whole document grammatically, and you might consult other research. Maybe some other historian has read the document before, and that might inform you understanding better what the document says. Okay, so I mentioned that in this article, he was nice enough to include a little bit more primary sources. And so let's go back up to the top of the document. It looks like this is just the introduction. And he's actually done a lot of the work for us. So what we see here is he's found a decree. And essentially this mirrors what we read in the previous document, which, and I think this is a prohibition. Yep, it's a prohibition ordinance. So notice that the name is different. So not the one with the decree, although it's so here's the decree when they're prohibited. So in these provinces, they say there's so many palms that there's so much wine that there's so many bars. They say the wine is cheap and strong, and the natives use it to such excess health and their lives. We'd have to look at the actual document, but my guess is what he's talking about is indigenous Americans. And this could be tinged a little bit of supremacy, a little bit of racism. Because who's to say that the Mexican Spaniards or the Spaniards that have been born in Mexico weren't drinking too? That probably means it's costing them their health, their lives. We get a very interesting part here. The big problem is that Castilian wine sale is hindered by the excessive use of palm wine. And even worse, the wine used in mass in church is being adulterated with palm wine. So they're pouring a little of the palm wine in to save money. So it looks like the real problem here is not just that it's causing people health in their lives. I doubt the government cares that much. The real problem is it's cheap and it's strong, and people aren't buying Castilian wine and into our holy wine in church, which we cannot stand. So then they move on, again, they explain why they're prohibiting this, and then they say it's prohibited, and they follow with the punishments, which, again, because of a heavily racialized caste system, Spaniard gets a fine and an exile. A mestizo, meaning a mixed Spaniard and native, a negro or African, or a mulatto, a biracial African and European, is to lose the wine and get 100 lashes and then be exiled. And then, for some reason, at the very bottom of the pyramid, uh, well, this is not a huge shock if you understand the racial caste system of Spain, but there's a little footnote here, and this is also something very interesting that we find out when we follow this footnote. Um, so, an Indian, okay, he gets less lashes, but he gets them publicly so that everybody can see. So, yeah, he gets half the lashes and then it's publicly humiliated. Let's follow this footnote because having read this already, this is very interesting. Including Filipinos, who are generally classed as Indios. So, in a really weird part of the Mexican or the New Spain hierarchy, Filipinos are classified as Indian. I guess it kind of makes sense if you think back to Columbus, that Columbus saw people in Native America and thought that there were Indians or Southeast Asians. So, given that Filipinos are Southeast Asian, maybe that's why the classification exists. But it is also a little strange that they fit them in the Indio category because that usually was one of the lowest categories. So, it'd be very probably been some historical work done on this about exactly how Filipinos in Mexico fit into the caste system and what was the reason that they were perceived as. Did that make them somehow higher in the hierarchy or lower in the hierarchy? Research to do for another day. Okay. So he hasn't put this in quotes, but given that he gave a this looks like basically a primary source. We can trust that this is a direct translation from the decree. And we actually don't know if that happened before or after were granted. So we can look a little bit more into that. But actually, we do know because our document starts with citing 1627, and we that 1619 was after the prohibition. So the prohibition happened early, and then at some point, due to disasters and people leaving, they allowed people to make coconut wine. Let me just check the chat really quickly. All right, there's a few people in here in the chat. Okay, so a little bit easier. We get a primary source, translate it into English. Hallelujah. So my brain doesn't have to completely break. But we can look into what they're saying here and see if we can get any sort of historical. So there are in Nueva España so many of those Indians who came from the Filipinas Islands. So again, the classification of Indians. So super interesting right here. This means that there was a decent population of Indians, or I'm sorry, of Filipinos living in this area in Mexico, in Western Mexico, and they're making palm wine on the coast. Remember, we said the word being tuba for the it means that there's a through line from the Philippines. This document basically says that much. The Filipinos are there. They make them with stills, as in the and he's also seems to be nervous, and they will not drink any wine make. So again, this sort of like concern that wine is not being drunk and the industry is dying. And then here we go with a little bit of snootiness, possibly some classism. For since the natives of Nueva España are a race in drink and intoxication, and the wine made by the Filipinos is distilled in the strongest brandy, they crave it rather than the wine from España. Paraphrased, all these natives are alcoholics, so they want the strong stuff. And then he's talking about the traffic in the wine. It can be, so here he makes a suggestion. It can be averted, suggestion to the problem, which is it can be averted provided all the Indian natives of the said Filipinas Islands are shipped and returned to them. The groves be burnt, the palm trees felled, and severe penalties imposed on whoever remains or returns to make that wine. So essentially, a classic solution for a problem, and I'm being kind of sarcastic, but deport all the people that we don't like and burn all the stuff that they made. Click back to the chat. Nope, nobody here. Even more interesting. Okay, so incited by their greed in that traffic, all the Indians who have charge of making that wine go to the port of Acapulco. When the ships reach their lead away with them all the Indians who come as common seamen. In this case, this Indians means native Mexicans, and this Indians means Filipinos. For that, and so basically, native Mexicans who apparently want to drink the strong stuff, probably want to engage in the lucrative industry of cocoa wine and need people that know how to do it, coconut wine, and need people that know how to do it so that they can and make some money. Poaching employees, so to speak, from the boats to the coconut fields. And then he says, scarcely any of them return to the Filipinas Islands. He actually cites a number of Filipinos that came over on one galleon, not more than 5. Super interesting to me. So what we have is not just an indication that coconut wine production was influenced by Filipino industry, but also that actual Filipinos came over to make this guy suggested that they be deported, too many of them, and also that Native Mexicans were essentially poaching people off the boats to take them inland to and probably make some money because it's. All right, in this article, we have a little bit more primary sources. I see 2 people in the chat. Feel free to put some questions in the chat. Never mind, they just left. So we'll move on. Okay. So let us move on to another one of the primary sources that we have cited in this article, read. Because remember, 1627, the protomedicato. Oh, okay, so I was wrong. It wasn't like a diagnosis or like a decree, like a medical decree. It was an official medical council of Mexico had declared the wine medicinal and not harmful. So he's essentially paraphrasing exactly what we just read. In fact, let's read through it really quickly and see how right we were. Okay, so it's granted 1627. Permission to plant coconut palms and to make coconut wine. Could be sold throughout New Spain, which we did say. So actually you could not sell to Indians. I'm not sure if I saw that in the document that we read. Again, the license was extended. The official medical council said that the wine was medicinal and not harmful. Another license granted, another 10 years, another 4 years, and another 6 years. And this is basically what we had said, that there was a fire and inhabitants had left it. There was a great ruin caused by earthquakes. And so we should pat ourselves on the back. We did actually pretty good reading that document. So here he may still be paraphrasing that same document because he's talking about the protomedicato. So yeah, coconut wine was then considered by the official medical council that the drink was helpful and beneficial. And then here we get another document of 1672 where a doctor weighs in. And not just the doctor, the clergy, tax collectors, and the governor. Here we go. I already read the first sentence, and this one is going to be a doozy. Indians are drunkards by nature, and nothing can be done about it. Prohibition has proved a failure, for it has increased drunkenness rather than diminished it. And now they say that, I see. So they're essentially criticizing the prohibition on coconut wine, saying that people are finding other stuff to drink. So he's saying instead of mezcal, instead of coconut wine, she says, are not harmful even when drunk to excess. I've drunk mezcal in my life before, and I would beg to differ. But he's saying that they escape into the interior and secretly make beverages from sugarcane, corn, tunas, which are the fruit of the prickly pear cactus, mesquite, which is a type of tree that's usually used for barbecuing, ciruelas, pear, plums, although this probably means a native type of plum. I'm not going to read this word. It probably means something, but it's something very vulgar in Mexican Spanish. Okay, continuing on. So, all right, let's stop. Super interesting. Just like in America with the government, it looks like people who want to drink are going to drink. And if they can't buy alcohol, they're going to find a way to make it themselves. And it looks like they're doing that, just not with coconuts, because probably because of the prohibition. And then here, more classist / racist rhetoric. Not only Indians, but also the Negroes, mulattoes, and other people of this quality. Whatever that means, but probably other mixtures of these undesirables and surely his beverages. So they get drunk, but they also get sick and death from peste. Peste means like a plague. Because this is probably many and not may, because many Indians have died of these drinks, and it is feared they might die out altogether. And since it is in their nature to use alcoholic beverages, the public sale of coconut wine in taverns and stores is permitted through Nueva Galicia for a period of 4 years. So, what an interesting document. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, we want to do our sort of analysis of the writer, and I think it's pretty clear what these people. So I'm not quite sure if these expert opinions were compiled by someone, or if this is the governor speaking, or this is a doctor or a clergy member. But in any case, whoever is writing this really has, shall we say, stereotypical or probably racist views of the people beneath him. Indians, Negroes, mulattoes, other people of this quality, and it's in their nature to use alcoholic beverages. It's just very interesting that it's almost like dripping with this almost like speciesist rhetoric. What I mean by that is this guy seems to consider himself like of a different quality, and that kind of tracks with some racial opinions that people of different colors are different species. And so he says, oh, well, they're prone to drunkenness, and it's in their nature. Let's just note very quickly, Indians, Negroes, mulattoes, all people who were in a state of, if not outright slavery, semi-slavery. I wonder why they might be getting drunk all the time. But of course, to him, he thinks it's in their nature. All right. We're going to wrap up soon. We've got these two other primary sources. And they are kind of interesting. So this historian editorializes here, and I think it's a great insight. And sometimes people come up with these amazing insights just out of like a sentence they found. But essentially what he's saying is this is sort of like common sense and social, and whoever wrote this clearly had an understanding of like social policy. because he says in the primary source, so the person from 400 years ago writes, it is bad politics and worse economics to prohibit something intrinsically good because of abuse. For there is nothing in the world, be it ever so holy, that men through the corruption of nature do not abuse. Amen. Um, it makes me think of laws these days that try to make things illegal and then somehow just make whatever they're trying to stop even worse. Now, our last little piece of primary source. Let's just check if anyone's still here. Nope. Okay. Is written by a bishop with other holy men. And there's no sort of explanation of this document by the historian. So let's read through this and see what we find. Accepting as certain and demonstrated that the vices of drinking and drunkenness are natural to the Indians, so there we go again, and that they cannot be entirely remedied, the drink that is least injurious to their health should be permitted, even if they use it to excess and drunkenness follows. All right. I would say this is probably in line with what we just read. A fairly solid understanding of social policy. Think what you may, but as I understand it, the philosophy of safe injection sites, people tend to criticize them, but notice that even 400 years ago, they're essentially advocating for harm reduction. They're saying, look, these people are going to drink. Let's let them drink the drink that's at least the better one for them. And you know what? If they drink too much and drunkenness follows, let's just let them do it. So similarly with safe injection sites, like people who are addicted to drugs are going to want to do drugs. Maybe we should look for a way to minimize how much harm comes from that. And then he continues. Coconut wine is a beverage of this sort, for it is healthful when used in moderation. By this means, the harm that results from the drinks which they invent can be avoided, and we can look to their conservation. For therein consists the conservation of these realms and of the public good. So when he says, where did he just say that? Is a beverage, by this means the harm that results from the drink. The drinks which they invent can be avoided. So what he's saying is all this weird drinks that they're making with what we read above, that they're making out of like sugar cane and a cactus and all kinds of weird stuff, which is funny that I'm saying weird because rum is made from sugar cane. But at least in this era, it looks like because there's a bishop and some other holy men, they're advocating that let's just let them drink the stuff that we know is less harmful so that they don't go find inventive ways to drink the weird stuff that's going to hurt them. So yeah, there we go. All right, we went through here and we looked at our primary sources. We analyzed them together, and I hope that was somewhat informative so you can understand a little bit of how I do my research and how historians do their research. Of course, full disclosure, I'm not employed as a historian in any meaningful fashion. Never written a history book. I've written a thesis, but so of course, if any real historian jumps in and comments, I'm putting this disclaimer out there just so that I don't have a bunch of comments saying, "Oh, this is not how it's done at all." This is generally how things are analyzed, and that's kind of the beauty of history, that different scholars can read the same document and come to their own conclusions, and then find other evidence to argue for the validity of their conclusions. This happens in science as well. In fact, a little bit of disagreement, a little bit of argument is actually good because that's how we get closer to the truth. So if we have someone here, I'm wrapping up right now. But if you like this video and you have some questions, you watch this video after I finish live streaming, please leave some comments with any questions about what we talked about. Feel free to criticize my analysis. Maybe if you're a native Spanish speaker, I made a mistake on this 400-year-old Spanish. It's been known to happen before. I'm happy to hear what you have to say. And know in the comments if you actually like this video and would like to accompany me as I do more research and read more primary sources. All right, guys. So have a good one. Good night, and see you.